Good morning, everybody. It is September 9th, 2025, when I am recording this video, and wanted to tackle a topic that I'm sure is going to get some fiery comments in the old comment section. Namely, did white people invent slavery? The reason I'm bringing this up is there's some polling data out that is a little bit alarming. According to a poll, let me try to make sure I get this right, done by the Presidential Election Study in 2024 of a little over 3,000 people, they asked the question, white people invented slavery, true or false? Amongst whites, 25% of white men said it was true, 39% of white women, 49% of Hispanic men thought it was true, 59% of Hispanic women, 53% of African American men thought it was true, and 69% of African American women, 41% of Asian men, and 55% of Asian women. It's interesting that there's a significantly higher percentage across all races for women than men. Long story short, everybody who put true was wrong, and this represents a profound failure on the part of the American education system. Now, obviously, there was slavery in the United States. It was outlawed really initially by the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, and then by act of Congress, or really by constitutional amendment by Congress in 1865. Slavery was an evil. It was a horrible thing. It is very good that we got rid of it. We should have gotten rid of it much sooner. By the way, it's also a terrible economic system. Absolutely retarded the economy of the South. There's this weird myth that progressives have taken that slavery was this incredible source of wealth. It was the biggest asset class in the United States, which is just ridiculous. By the way, that was the same thing that the Confederates used to say after the war. Well, we had to go to war because we were going to lose the slaves, and they were so valuable we just couldn't do it. Why the modern left has picked this up is just beyond me. It's completely false. But I digress. I wanted to get into the idea of, did white people invent slavery? So let's take a little journey through history. Let's go back to some of the earliest records of slavery. Some of the earliest ones are found in ancient Sumeria, think the Middle East. That's around 6000 BC. They're also found in Mesopotamia, think modern day Iraq. They actually are written into Hammurabi's code in 1750 BC. By the way, 6000 BC, that's over 8,000 years ago. 1750 BC, so you've probably heard of Hammurabi's code. So basically, the Mesopotamians are writing laws about slavery. That's over 3,700 years ago, really almost 3,800 years ago. The United States would not even begin to be colonized for over 2,200, actually over 3,200 years from when this is being written into law in Iraq. The ancient Egyptians, the first records of slavery in ancient Egypt go back to 2700 BC. That's almost 5,000, that's over 4,700 years ago, almost 5,000 years ago. Ancient China goes back to the Xia dynasty, back to 2000 BC. That's over 4,000 years ago. By the way, China did not outlaw slavery until 1910, and the practice remained at least somewhat common until about 1949. Going back to the Middle East, after the Islamic Revolution, the Abbasid Caliphate had slavery written into law in 660 AD. This is 900 years before the colonization process of North America even really begins. Japan goes back to the 3rd century BC. Chinese travelers were recording slaves back then. In the 8th century by the way, 3rd century BC, that's like 2,300 years ago. In Japan's 8th century legal codes, okay, so we're talking 12 centuries ago, they were writing laws regarding slavery. Not outlawing it, by the way, administering it. I want to be very clear. When I talk about laws being written, none of this is an abolition law. This was a law of how to properly administer slavery. Ancient India records slavery going back to 2600 BC. The Aztecs and the Mayans, think ancient South, not really ancient South America, but South America pre-colonial era, both had active slave cultures. So the point of all this is that we have slavery all over the world. By the way, another example. The Ottoman Empire. And if you're not familiar with the Ottomans, it's a Muslim empire centered around modern-day Turkey. It will, at its peak, expand well into southeastern Europe. It will cover all of North Africa, or hold parts of Spain, hold various islands across the Mediterranean. It's actually an enormous empire. Between 1500 and 1700, from the Mediterranean region and the Black Sea region, so think Russia, North Africa, and Southern Europe, they would take 4 million slaves. The word slave, by the way, comes from the word Slav because so many slaves were being taken from the Black Sea regions, the Slavic regions, so think Ukraine, Russia, Romania, places like that, that's actually where the modern word slave comes from. So again, none of this is to say slavery didn't happen in the United States or that it wasn't terrible or anything like that. But the point is, from a historical point of view, if you think that white people invented slavery, my God in heaven, have you ever opened a history book? We have slavery being recorded in non white cultures thousands of years before the birth of Christ, and several thousand years before even the European discovery of the Americas. So, again, I understand that this is a useful political narrative for people, but it is wildly, unbelievably historically inaccurate. And so wanted to put that out there. By the way, slavery in all these places was terrible. Slavery is a bad system. It's a immoral system. It's an evil system. It's also an economically very poor system. Amazingly enough, people who are coerced into labor and their only reward is that they will not be punished are incredibly bad workers. Also, by virtue of the fact that you do not want your slaves becoming too educated or too independent in their thought, it means that you must keep them in relatively low value add work. There are countless historical examples of various artisans being captured, a blacksmith, a potter, something like that. If they were in one of the groups lucky enough that were slave groups lucky enough to have children, their children usually end up being largely unskilled workers, just simple agrarian labor, because the skills oftentimes didn't get passed on. By the way, that's actually slavery is actually how writing comes to the Islamic world. They win a battle against the Chinese army in Central Asia, might have been near Samarkand, and they enslaved most of the prisoners, including some Chinese who knew how to write, and so that's how written language. I'm sorry, when I say written language, paper. They writing on paper. That's how that comes into the Islamic world. So the point of all this, though, is that it was everywhere. It was been around since long before the Romans, long before the Greeks, certainly long before any of the, as we think of them, the more modern European nation states, the British, the French, the Germans, the Italians, things like that. It is an ancient institution. And the other thing to remember is slavery is the historical norm. It was everywhere. Everybody did it. All over the globe, all over South America, all over Asia, Southeast Asia, all over the Indian subcontinent, certainly in parts of Europe. It was all over Africa. It was all over the Middle East. It depending on what time period, it was in almost every part of Europe you could think of. There were slaves taken between the North American and Native American tribes. Sacagawea, you may remember from the Lewis and Clark expedition. She was taken as a slave by Native Americans. In fact, that's how her French husband got her, was he bought her from a Native American tribe who had enslaved her. Sorry. The point of all this is we have failed to give people proper context. Yes, slavery happened in the United States. Yes, it was evil and immoral. No objection or argument there. We are hardly the only ones, and white people were certainly not the first to start it. In fact, they were nowhere even close to that. By the way, just to give you an idea of just how brutal slavery could be in other parts of the world, if you ever see those maps of the African slave trades and you see all the slaves crossing the Atlantic, you also see a couple of million slaves coming out of East Africa and going up into the Middle East. You may wonder, well, then where's the where's the multi-generational black population, the descendants of slaves in the Middle East? The answer is there's hardly any of them, because one of the things the Arabs did in the Middle East, they did not want them to breed. So virtually all the males were castrated. So there's hardly any descendants of those slaves. So again, context matters, and it is good to understand that the world we live in which slavery is universally decried as an immoral and illegal system, is the outlier by historical standards. The historical norm is for slavery to be accepted and tolerated, and indeed even celebrated. It's still a crap system, and let us hope that humanity will never return to it and that we will never tolerate and never accept it, because it should never be under any circumstances. It remains as illegal and immoral today as it ever has been and should remain that way forever. But again, it is worth having a broader historical understanding of this. All right, thank you. Have a good day.